Detective Lawrence Pierce had been wearing a badge in the small town of Riverside for 17 years. To some people, he represented law and order. To others, especially those living on the east side of town, he represented something much darker. Something that made parents pull their children inside when his patrol car rolled down their street. Tamika Washington knew Pierce's reputation better than most. At 36 years old, she'd built a quiet life as a social worker, helping families navigate tough situations. But before that, she'd spent 6 years in the Army as a combat medic. She'd seen things, done things, survived things that most people couldn't imagine. Those years had changed her, given her skills she never thought she'd need again. She was wrong about that. The trouble started with her nephew, Andre. He was 16, a good kid who loved basketball and dreamed of going to college, smart enough to stay out of trouble, respectful enough to say yes ma'am and no sir without being reminded. But none of that mattered to Detective Pierce. Over 3 months, Pierce had pulled Andre over 5 times. 5 times for riding his bike, 5 times for walking down the street, 5 times for existing while being young and black in a town where that was apparently suspicious enough. The first time, Andre came home shaken but unharmed. Pierce had made him empty his pockets, searched his backpack, questioned him about where he was going and where he'd been. No ticket, no arrest, just intimidation. The second time was worse. Pierce had made Andre sit on the curb for 40 minutes while he ran his information. Neighbors watched. Friends saw. The humiliation was the point. By the 5th time, Tamika had started documenting everything. She bought Andre a phone with a good camera and taught him how to start recording without being obvious about it. She took notes, wrote down dates and times, got statements from witnesses. She filed complaints with the police department. She called the Internal Affairs office. She even contacted a civil rights lawyer in the city 3 hours away. Nothing happened. Every complaint disappeared into the system like water into sand. The lawyer said they needed more evidence, something concrete, something that couldn't be explained away. The Internal Affairs officer, a tired-looking man named Patterson, listened politely and promised to look into it. Tamika never heard from him again. Meanwhile, Pierce kept coming around. He seemed to enjoy it now, like he knew she was watching and wanted to prove he could do whatever he wanted. He'd slow down when he drove past their house. He'd smile that cold smile when he saw her at the grocery store. Once he even pulled her over, looked at her license and said, "You should teach that nephew of yours some respect. Boys like him end up in bad situations around here." The threat was clear. Stay quiet or things would get worse. But Tamika Washington wasn't built to stay quiet. The Army had taught her something important. When you're in a bad situation, you don't freeze, you don't run, you adapt and overcome. So she started carrying her own camera in the car. She started taking different routes. She started noting which other officers worked with Pierce who seemed to follow his lead, who looked uncomfortable but didn't speak up. That's how she noticed Officer David Chen. He was young, maybe 25, fresh out of the academy with that eager look that hadn't been worn down yet. She'd seen him with Pierce 3 times now, and each time something in his body language seemed off. Not aggressive like Pierce. More uncertain. Like he was seeing things that didn't match what he'd been taught. The day everything changed started, like any other August afternoon in Riverside. Hot, humid, the kind of weather that made people irritable and shortened tempers. Tamika had finished her shift at the community center and was driving home, thinking about dinner, thinking about helping Andre with his college applications. Normal thoughts. Regular life. Then she saw the lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart sank before her mind even registered which car it was. She knew, of course she knew. Pierce had pulled her over twice before in the last month, always finding some excuse. A brake light that worked fine. Failure to signal when she definitely had. It didn't matter what the reason was. The harassment was the reason. She pulled over carefully, hands visible on the wheel, phone already recording in the holder on her dashboard. She'd learned to start recording the moment she saw those lights. 3 months of footage saved in the cloud, just in case. Pierce took his time getting out of his car. That was part of his routine, making people wait, making them nervous. Through her side mirror, she saw Officer Chen in the passenger seat. The rookie looked uncomfortable already, and nothing had even happened yet. When Pierce finally approached, his hand was already resting on his service weapon. Not drawing it, just resting there. A casual threat. He leaned down to her window with that smile she'd come to hate. License and registration. he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't really about paperwork. Tamika kept her voice steady. Can you tell me why you pulled me over, officer? I don't need to tell you anything, Pierce said. License and registration now. She reached for her glove compartment slowly, announcing every movement. I'm reaching for my registration now. It's in the glove compartment. Step out of the car, Pierce said suddenly. Why? What did I do wrong? I said step out of the car. His hand tightened on his weapon. This was new. In the previous stops he'd taken her documents, run her license, given her a warning for some made-up violation. But he'd never ordered her out of the car. Something felt different today. Dangerous. Tamika opened her door and stepped out, keeping her hands visible. Years of military training kicked in automatically, assessing the situation. 2 officers. Pierce was approximately 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, agitated. Chen hanging back by the patrol car, hand near his weapon but not on it, looking increasingly uncertain. Her car camera recording. Residential street. Neighbors probably watching from windows but not coming outside. No immediate backup for either side. Turn around. Hands on the car, Pierce ordered. Officer, I need to know what law I've broken. That's when Pierce moved closer. Violating her space, his face inches from hers. She could smell coffee on his breath, see the anger in his eyes. You people think you can question me? Think you can file complaints and nothing will happen? Let me tell you something. He didn't finish the sentence. His radio crackled with some call from dispatch and he stepped back, muttering something she didn't catch. But she caught the look he gave her. Pure hatred. This wasn't about traffic violations anymore. Maybe it never had been. Stay right there, Pierce ordered, walking back toward his patrol car. Tamika's mind raced. Every instinct told her this situation was escalating beyond a normal stop. She glanced at Officer Chen, who was staring at Pierce with an expression she couldn't quite read. Concern, confusion? She couldn't tell. Then Pierce made a call on his radio. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she saw him gesturing at her car. Her stomach dropped. Was he calling for backup? Was he planning to arrest her for what? The August sun beat down on the pavement, making the air shimmer. Sweat rolled down her back, but Tamika didn't move. She stood there, hands visible, breathing steady, while everything she'd feared for 3 months crystallized into this single moment on this single afternoon. Whatever was about to happen, her phone was recording. Whatever Pierce tried to do, there would be evidence this time. She just hoped that evidence would matter to someone, somewhere, before it was too late. Officer Chen took a step forward, then stopped. He looked at Pierce, then at Tamika, then back at Pierce. Even from a distance, she could see the conflict on his young face. He was seeing something that didn't add up, something that challenged what he thought he knew about his job, his partner, maybe even himself. The air felt heavy with more than just humidity. Something was building here, some confrontation that had been coming for months, maybe years. Tamika could feel it in her bones, the same way she'd felt incoming danger during her deployments, that primal sense that the world was about to shift in ways no one could predict or control. She was right. Detective Pierce walked back toward Tamika with something in his hand. She couldn't see what it was at first, but the way he was moving, the deliberate slowness of his steps, told her this wasn't routine anymore. This was personal. You know what I found interesting? Pierce said, his voice loud enough that Officer Chen could hear from where he stood by the patrol car. Got a report about suspicious activity in this area. Drug deals. And here you are driving through at exactly the wrong time. Tamika's blood ran cold. She knew what was happening. She'd heard stories about Pierce doing this to other people, but hearing about it and experiencing it were completely different things. I live 3 blocks from here. I'm driving home from work. Sure you are, Pierce said, that cold smile spreading across his face. But I think we need to search your vehicle. Make sure you're not transporting anything illegal. You don't have probable cause for a search. Pierce's smile disappeared. I have whatever cause I say I have. Now you can cooperate or we can do this the hard way. Your choice. The threat hung in the air between them. Tamika's mind raced through options. If she refused, he'd arrest her for obstruction. If she agreed, who knows what he might find in her car. She thought about Andre, about all the times Pierce had harassed him, about all the complaints she'd filed that went nowhere. She thought about her phone recording everything, but would that even matter? How many videos had she seen where nothing happened? where officers faced no consequences, where the system protected its own. "I want to call my lawyer," Tamika said firmly. Pierce stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "You can call whoever you want from the station. After we're done here." That's when Officer Chen spoke up. "Detective, maybe we should stay by the car, Chen," Pierce snapped without looking at him. "This doesn't concern you." But Chen didn't move back. Tamika could see him in her peripheral vision, watching everything with growing concern. The young officer's instincts were clearly telling him something was wrong here, even if he didn't know what to do about it yet. Pierce turned back to Tamika's car and started searching through the driver's side door, pulling items out roughly, tossing them onto the ground. Her work bag, her gym clothes, registration papers. He moved to the back seat, and that's when she saw him reach into his jacket pocket. Everything slowed down in that moment. She'd seen enough in her life to recognize what was happening. Pierce was about to plant something in her car. Evidence that would justify an arrest, that would destroy her credibility, that would make everything she'd been documenting look like the complaints of a criminal rather than a victim. "Stop," Tamika said. "Stop right now." "I know what you're doing." Pierce turned to face her, and for a second something flickered across his face. Surprise maybe that she'd caught him, or anger that she'd dared to speak up. His hand was still in his pocket. "You don't know anything," Pierce said, his voice dangerous now. "You're about to catch a charge that'll make you wish you'd kept your mouth shut all these months." Officer Chen moved closer, his hand dropping to his belt. "Detective Pierce, what's going on?" "I said stay back," Pierce growled, but Chen didn't stay back. He was close enough now to see what Tamika was seeing, close enough to understand that something very wrong was happening. His face changed, that rookie eagerness draining away, replaced by something harder: disappointment, disillusionment, the death of something innocent. Pierce pulled his hand from his pocket, and Tamika saw the small plastic bag, saw what was in it, saw her future collapsing into arrest records and court dates, and a system that had already proven it wouldn't listen to her. Something inside her snapped. Not broke, but snapped into focus. Clarity like she hadn't felt since her combat days. She moved without thinking, letting her military training take over. Pierce was turned slightly away from her, focused on placing the evidence, confident in his power, not expecting resistance. That was his mistake. Tamika grabbed his wrist as he reached into the car. Her other hand found the tactical knife on his belt, the one she'd noticed the first time he ever pulled Andre over, the one he probably used for exactly this kind of situation. In 3 quick movements, she'd twisted his arm, stepped behind him, and had his own knife pressed against his throat. Everything stopped. Pierce froze, the plastic bag falling from his hand onto her car seat. Officer Chen's hand went to his weapon but didn't draw it. The street, which had been quiet except for their voices, became absolutely silent. "Don't move," Tamika said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Either of you." She wasn't threatening anyone. She was surviving. There was a difference, though she knew it wouldn't look that way to everyone watching. But in that moment, with Pierce's planted evidence right there on her seat, with 3 months of harassment behind her and possibly years of false imprisonment ahead of her, she'd made a calculation. Sometimes the only way out was through. "You're making a big mistake," Pierce said, his voice strained. "No," Tamika replied. "The mistake was thinking I'd let you destroy my life without fighting back." Officer Chen's face had gone pale. His hand was still on his weapon, but he wasn't drawing it. He was staring at something on the ground. The bag had fallen when Pierce dropped it, and from where Chen was standing he could see what else had fallen out of Pierce's pocket during the struggle. More bags, a small handgun with the serial numbers filed off, the tools of evidence planting laid bare on the hot pavement. "Chen," Pierce said, trying to maintain control even with a knife at his throat. "Officer Chen, draw your weapon." "That's an order." But Chen was looking at those items on the ground, and Tamika could see his whole world reshaping itself. How many stops had he been on with Pierce? How many arrests had he watched his training officer make? How many of those had been legitimate, and how many had been setups just like this one? "Officer Chen," Tamika said carefully, "I need you to look at what fell from his pocket. Really look at it." Chen crouched down, his eyes widening as he examined the items. A throwdown gun, multiple bags of substances that looked like drugs, a second knife. This wasn't just one moment of corruption. This was a kit, a system, a routine. "How many?" Chen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He wasn't asking Tamika. He was asking Pierce. How many people have you done this to? Pierce said nothing, but his silence was answer enough. Tamika's phone was still recording everything from her dashboard. She could see it in her peripheral vision. That small red light that meant somewhere in the cloud this evidence was being saved. But would it be enough? Would anyone believe her? Would they see a black woman holding a knife to a white police officer's throat and stop there? Or would they look deeper? My phone is recording, Tamika said, speaking clearly toward the dashboard. Everything is recorded. The stop, the harassment, the planted evidence, all of it. She could feel Pierce tense under the knife, not because of the blade, but because of those words. Evidence, proof. The thing he'd been so confident she'd never have. Chen. Pierce tried again, his voice different now, pleading. We're partners. We're on the same team here. But Officer Chen was shaking his head, still staring at that kid on the ground. No, he said slowly. No, we're not. He stood up and took a step back, then another. His hand moved away from his weapon and went to his radio instead. Tamika's heart pounded as she watched him make a choice in real time. Would he call for backup and paint her as the aggressor? Would he protect his partner, the way the system had protected Pierce for 17 years? Dispatch, Chen said into his radio, his voice shaking slightly. This is Officer Chen, badge number 2847. I need supervision at my location immediately. I need to report a situation involving Detective Pierce. What kind of situation? The dispatcher's voice crackled back. Chen looked at Pierce, at Tamika, at that evidence kit on the ground. Corruption, he said finally. I need to report corruption. The word hung in the air like a thunderclap. Pierce's body went rigid. You don't know what you're doing, Chen. You're throwing away your career for what? Chen interrupted, anger creeping into his voice now. For telling the truth? For not letting you frame an innocent person? How many, Pierce? How many people are sitting in jail right now because of kits like this? Pierce didn't answer. His silence was damning. Tamika's arms were starting to shake from holding the knife steady, from the adrenaline flooding her system, from the weight of what she'd done and what it might cost her. But she didn't lower the blade, not yet. Not until she knew for certain that someone in a position of power was going to listen this time. My name is Tamika Washington, she said, still speaking toward her recording phone. I'm a social worker and Army veteran. Detective Lawrence Pierce has been harassing me and my family for 3 months. Today he attempted to plant drugs in my vehicle. Everything I'm saying is documented. My phone has been recording. She paused, making sure every word was captured clearly. I'm not a criminal. I'm not resisting. I'm protecting myself from false arrest. Officer Chen is a witness to everything that happened here. Chen nodded, his hand still on his radio. I saw it, he confirmed. I saw everything. In the distance, Tamika could hear sirens. Backup was coming. Her next few minutes would determine whether she walked away from this or became another story of a civilian who fought back and paid the price. But one thing had changed. This time she wasn't alone. This time there was a witness who'd chosen truth over loyalty. This time, there was evidence that couldn't be buried. Pierce must have realized it too because his body sagged slightly, some of the fight going out of him. He wasn't in control anymore and he knew it. The sirens grew louder, but something else was happening on the street. Doors were opening. People were stepping out onto their porches, onto the sidewalk. This was the east side of Riverside, where everyone knew everyone, where gossip traveled faster than phone calls, where news of a confrontation with Detective Pierce spread like wildfire. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, no relation to Officer Chen despite sharing a last name, came out first. She was 72 years old and had lived on this street for 47 years. She'd watched her neighborhood change, watched her children grow up here, watched her grandchildren play on these sidewalks. She'd also watched Detective Pierce operate for almost 2 decades. She pulled out her phone and started recording. What's happening? Called a voice from across the street. It was Raymond Torres coming out of his auto repair shop, wiping grease from his hands. He took one look at the scene and understood immediately. He didn't know all the details, but he knew Pierce. Everyone on this side of town knew Pierce. Raymond pulled out his phone too. Within 5 minutes, there were a dozen people on the street. Then 20, then more. They didn't approach, didn't get too close, didn't threaten anyone. They just stood there, phones out, recording, creating a circle of witnesses that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Tamika felt the shift in the air, felt the presence of her community around her. These were her neighbors, people she'd worked with through the community center, families she'd helped navigate social services, kids she'd watched grow up. They were here not to escalate the situation, but to make sure what happened next couldn't be buried. Officer Chen noticed the growing crowd and looked nervous. This was probably nothing like what they'd trained him for at the academy. His hand hovered near his radio, but he didn't call it in. Not yet. Among the crowd, Tamika recognized Pastor Leonard Williams from Mount Hope Baptist Church. He was in his 60s, a steady presence in the community for 30 years. His son Darius had been one of Pierce's victims 5 years ago. Arrested on drug charges that never quite added up. Convicted based on evidence that appeared from nowhere. Now serving 8 years in state prison. The family had always maintained his innocence, but who listened? Pastor Williams didn't just record. He stepped forward carefully, his hands visible, his voice calm. "Detective Pierce," he said. "I'm Pastor Williams. I'm here as a community witness. I'm recording everything that's happening, and I want everyone to know that we're not here to cause trouble. We're here to make sure the truth is seen." Pierce couldn't respond without moving his throat against the knife, so he stayed silent. But Tamika could feel the tension in his body change. The presence of so many witnesses, so many cameras, was shifting the power dynamic in ways he couldn't control. Another person pushed through the crowd, a younger woman in hospital scrubs. Nicole Fletcher, who worked as a nurse at Riverside General. Her husband had been pulled over by Pierce 7 times last year. 7 times without a single ticket, just harassment. Just intimidation. Just the message that he wasn't welcome in certain parts of town, even though he'd lived here his entire life. "I see you, Pierce," Nicole called out, her phone held high. "We all see you now." More people kept coming. Each one had a story. Each one had a reason to be there. The sirens were very close now, and 3 patrol cars pulled onto the street, lights flashing. Officers jumped out, hands moving toward weapons, trying to assess the situation. But they stopped when they saw the crowd, saw the phones, saw Officer Chen standing there with his hands away from his weapon. One of the arriving officers was Sergeant Rita Barnes, a 20-year veteran who'd worked with Pierce before. She was sharp, observant, and fair in a way that had earned her respect even on the east side. She took in the scene quickly. Tamika with the knife, Pierce in her grip, Chen looking shaken, the evidence kit on the ground, and dozens of community members recording everything. "Everyone stay calm," Sergeant Barnes called out, her voice steady and authoritative. "Nobody move." She approached slowly, her eyes moving between Tamika and the items on the ground. Tamika watched the sergeant's face carefully, trying to read whether this would be another moment of the system protecting its own or something different. "Ma'am," Barnes said, addressing Tamika directly. "My name is Sergeant Barnes. I need you to tell me what's happening here." Before Tamika could answer, Officer Chen spoke up. "Sergeant, I witnessed Detective Pierce attempt to plant evidence in this woman's vehicle. He pulled what appears to be narcotics from his pocket and was placing them in her car when she stopped him." The other officers looked shocked. One of them, a younger guy Tamika didn't recognize, actually took a step back like he'd been pushed. Accusing a detective of planting evidence out loud in front of witnesses and cameras. This wasn't how things were done. "That's a serious allegation, Chen," Barnes said carefully. "It's the truth, Sergeant," Chen replied, his voice stronger now. "That kit on the ground fell from his pocket, I saw it. It contains drugs, a throwdown weapon, and other items. This woman, Ms. Washington, she was defending herself from a false arrest." Pastor Williams stepped forward again. "Sergeant Barnes, I don't know if you remember me, but we met 5 years ago, when my son was arrested by Detective Pierce. Found with drugs we never believed he had. Now I'm looking at that kit on the ground, and I'm wondering where those drugs came from." Barnes's expression shifted slightly. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. She crouched down to examine the items on the ground, careful not to touch anything. Tamika could see the sergeant's jaw tighten as she looked at the evidence kit, professional enough to recognize what she was seeing. How many others? Someone called from the crowd. How many other families? More voices joined in, not angry but insistent. The crowd wasn't yelling or threatening. They were asking questions, demanding answers, using their presence and their cameras to insist that this time, someone had to listen. "My brother," called out a man in the back. "Arrested 3 years ago." "My cousin," said another voice. "My neighbor's kid." The stories came one after another, creating a map of Pierce's corruption that couldn't be ignored. Each voice represented a life disrupted, a family torn apart, a person sitting in prison for crimes they might not have committed. Sergeant Barnes stood up, her expression unreadable. She spoke into her radio. "This is Sergeant Barnes. I need Captain Rodriguez at my location immediately. Also requesting internal affairs and a crime scene unit." Pierce tensed again at the mention of internal affairs. Tamika felt it through the knife, felt his awareness that this was spiraling beyond his control. For 17 years he'd operated with impunity, protected by the code of silence, by the benefit of doubt that officers received, by a system that chose to believe badges over victims. But standing here, surrounded by witnesses, with his evidence kit exposed on the ground and his own training officer telling the truth, that protection was crumbling. Another car pulled up and a woman in a suit stepped out. She moved with authority, someone clearly higher up the chain of command. Captain Maria Rodriguez was the highest-ranking Latina officer in Riverside's police department, known for running a tight ship and not tolerating misconduct. She'd been with the department for 16 years, long enough to have heard rumors about Pierce but never having the evidence to act on them. Until now. Rodriguez surveyed the scene with sharp eyes, taking in every detail. The crowd with their phones, Officer Chen standing as a witness rather than a backup, the evidence kit on the ground, Tamika with the knife, and Pierce silent and trapped. "Someone want to explain what I'm looking at?" Rodriguez said. Officer Chen stepped forward. "Captain, I witnessed Detective Pierce attempt to plant narcotics in this civilian's vehicle during what appeared to be a pretextual traffic stop. When the civilian, Ms. Washington, defended herself, this evidence kit fell from his pocket. I believe it contains items used to plant evidence on multiple occasions." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. She'd been in law enforcement long enough to know what she was looking at, even if she didn't want to believe it. "And the knife?" "Self-defense, Captain," Chen said. She was protecting herself from a false arrest. "I watched the whole thing happen." The captain turned to Sergeant Barnes. "You trust Chen's account?" Barnes nodded slowly. "I trust what I'm seeing with my own eyes, Captain. That kid on the ground is real. These community members all have stories about Pierce, and Ms. Washington's car camera is recording everything." Rodriguez looked at the dashboard camera, at the small red light that indicated it was still running. Everything would be on video. Every word, every action, every piece of evidence. This wasn't a situation that could be swept under the rug or explained away. "Ms. Washington," Rodriguez said, turning to Tamika, "I need you to lower that knife. I understand you feel threatened, but I'm giving you my word as a captain in this department that Detective Pierce will not be placing anything in your vehicle. He will be investigated thoroughly based on what's been witnessed here today." Tamika looked at the captain, trying to judge whether this was a promise that would be kept. She'd heard promises before. 3 months of filing complaints, all of them disappearing into the bureaucratic void. But she'd also heard Officer Chen break ranks. She'd seen Sergeant Barnes examine that evidence kit with clear recognition of what it meant. And she saw the community around her still recording, still witnessing. "I want it on record," Tamika said, her voice steady. "Everything that happened here. I want Officer Chen's statement documented. I want that evidence kit properly logged and tested. And I want to know how many other people Detective Pierce has done this to." Rodriguez nodded. "You have my word. Now please lower the knife before this situation gets worse." Pastor Williams spoke up from the crowd. "Captain Rodriguez, we're all witnesses here. This community will be watching to make sure justice is done. Real justice, not the kind that protects bad officers and ignores victims." "I understand, Pastor," Rodriguez replied. She seemed to genuinely mean it. Tamika's arms were aching from holding the knife steady for so long. Her heart was still racing, but the immediate danger felt like it had passed. She'd achieved what she needed to. Exposure, evidence, witnesses, official acknowledgement. Pushing further would only put her in more danger. She slowly lowered the knife, letting it drop to the ground and stepping back with her hands raised. Immediately, 2 officers moved forward to secure Pierce, though notably they didn't approach Tamika aggressively. Rodriguez had signaled clearly how this was going to be handled. As Pierce's hands were cuffed behind his back, something unexpected happened. The detective's shoulders sagged, and he sank to his knees on the hot pavement. Detective Lawrence Pierce, who'd stood tall and threatening just minutes ago, was now on his knees in handcuffs. But he wasn't kneeling because the officers had forced him down. He'd collapsed there on his own. The weight of 17 years of corruption, finally breaking through whatever wall he'd built in his mind to justify what he'd done. Captain Rodriguez stood over him, her expression hard to read. The crowd had gone silent, everyone watching this moment unfold. Even the other officers seemed unsure what to do. This wasn't procedure. This wasn't how these things usually went. "Get up, detective," Rodriguez said, her voice firm but not cruel. Pierce didn't move. His head hung down, his breathing heavy. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence of that street everyone heard it. "I can't." Rodriguez crouched down to his level. "You can't what?" "I can't keep doing this." Pierce's voice cracked. "I can't keep pretending. I can't keep running from it." The captain exchanged a look with Sergeant Barnes. This wasn't defiance or resistance. This was something else entirely. Something they probably hadn't expected. Pierce lifted his head, and Tamika saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not the cold hatred or the confident cruelty. This was different. This looked like a man who'd been carrying something too heavy for too long, and finally couldn't hold it anymore. "How many?" Rodriguez asked quietly. "How many people, Pierce?" The question hung in the air. The phones were still recording. The community still watching. Officer Chen stood nearby, his face pale, waiting to hear the answer to a question that would define his understanding of the last several months working alongside this man. Pierce took a shuddering breath. "I don't know the exact number. 20, 30, maybe more. I stopped counting after the first few years." The collective gasp from the crowd was audible. People who'd had suspicions, who'd heard stories, were now hearing confirmation from Pierce's own mouth. 30 people, maybe more, families destroyed, lives derailed, years stolen. "My son," Pastor Williams said from the crowd, his voice thick with emotion. "Darius Williams. 5 years ago. Was he one of them?" Pierce nodded slowly.
"Yes, I planted cocaine in his car."
He was innocent. The pastor's knees buckled and 2 people from the crowd caught him. His wife had passed away 3 years ago, her heart broken by their son's imprisonment. She died believing her child was guilty, believing the system had been right and her own instincts as a mother had been wrong. Nicole Fletcher stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "My husband, Carlos Fletcher. You pulled him over 7 times last year. Were you planning to do it to him too?" Pierce looked up at her. "I was trying to. He was too careful, never gave me an opening. So you just harassed him instead?" Nicole's voice shook with anger. "Made him afraid to drive in his own neighborhood. Made my kids ask why the police always stopped their daddy." Pierce had no answer for that. Or maybe the answer was too obvious to need saying. Captain Rodriguez stood up and pulled Pierce to his feet. "You're under arrest, detective. But before I read you your rights, I need to know if you'll cooperate with a full investigation. Every case you touched, every arrest you made, every piece of evidence you planted. All of it. And what's the point?" Pierce said, sounding exhausted. "My life is over anyway." "The point," Rodriguez said sharply, "is that there are people sitting in prison right now who might be innocent. People who've lost years of their lives because of what you did. They deserve the truth. Their families deserve the truth." She gestured toward the crowd. "These people deserve answers. So I'll ask you again, will you cooperate?" For a long moment, Pierce just stood there. Tamika watched emotions play across his face. Anger maybe at being caught, fear of what was coming. But underneath it all, something that looked almost like relief. Like a man who'd been running for so long that being caught was almost a comfort. "Yes," he finally said. "I'll tell you everything. Every case. Every person. All of it." Rodriguez nodded to the other officers who began reading Pierce his rights. But before they could lead him away, he turned to look at Tamika. "I'm sorry," he said. The words hung there, inadequate and hollow. What did sorry mean to someone whose nephew he'd terrorized, whose life he'd tried to destroy just to protect his own corruption? Sorry didn't undo 3 months of fear. Sorry didn't give back the security of believing the police were there to protect you. Tamika didn't respond. She just looked at him. This man who'd seemed so powerful and untouchable an hour ago, now broken and confessing in front of dozens of witnesses. She didn't feel satisfaction exactly. Mostly she felt tired, and angry, and sad for all the people who hadn't been able to fight back the way she had. "Please," Pierce added, his voice breaking. "Please, I'm begging you. Tell them I cooperated. Tell them I confessed. I'll give them everything. You're begging me? Tamika's voice was quiet but sharp. You're begging me for mercy after you tried to destroy my life? After you terrorized my family? After you put how many innocent people in prison? I know I don't deserve it, Pierce said. I know, but please, I'll make it right. I'll tell the truth about every case. I'll testify, whatever it takes. Captain Rodriguez intervened. That's enough, Detective. You'll have plenty of time to make statements. Get him in the car. As the officers led Pierce away, he looked back at the crowd one more time, faces staring at him with anger, with pain, with the accumulated weight of years of abuse finally being acknowledged. Some people were crying. Some were holding each other. All of them were recording, making sure this moment was captured forever. Officer Chen approached Captain Rodriguez, his face still pale. Captain, I need to make a formal statement. About everything I saw today, about other stops I've been on with him where things seemed off. I should have said something sooner. Rodriguez studied the young officer. You're saying something now. That counts for something, Chen. But yes, you'll need to make a full statement, and you'll probably need to testify in multiple cases. I understand, Captain. Rodriguez turned to Tamika. Ms. Washington, I'm going to need you to come to the station as well. Not under arrest, she added quickly, seeing Tamika's expression. As a witness. And a victim. We need your statement, your recordings, everything you've documented over the past 3 months. Will it matter? Tamika asked. Will anything actually change? The captain took a moment before answering. I can't promise you everything will be fixed overnight, but I can promise you that I will personally oversee this investigation. Every case Pierce touched will be reviewed. Every person he arrested will have their case re-examined, and we will prosecute him to the fullest extent of the law. Sergeant Barnes stepped forward. Captain, we're going to need internal affairs here. We're going to need the district attorney's office. This is bigger than just one bad arrest. This is a systematic corruption case that goes back years. Already called them, Rodriguez said. They're on their way. She turned back to address the crowd. I know many of you have been affected by Detective Pierce's actions. I know trust has been broken, not just with him but with this entire department. I'm asking you to give us a chance to make this right. We'll be setting up a hotline for anyone who believes they were falsely arrested or had evidence planted. Every case will be investigated. What about the people already in prison? Pastor Williams asked, his voice still shaky. What about my son? If your son's case was connected to Pierce, it will be reviewed immediately, Rodriguez promised. I can't guarantee outcomes, but I can guarantee a thorough investigation. And if evidence was planted, we'll work with the DA to get convictions overturned. Dorothy Chen, the elderly woman who'd been first to start recording, spoke up. And what about the other officers? The ones who worked with him? The ones who must have known something was wrong but said nothing. It was a fair question. Pierce hadn't operated in a vacuum. There had been supervisors, partners, other officers who'd been on scenes where evidence was questionable. How many had looked the other way? How many had suspected but stayed silent? Rodriguez's jaw tightened. Anyone found to have knowingly participated in or covered up Detective Pierce's actions will face consequences. That's a promise. More police cars and unmarked vehicles were arriving now. The crime scene unit to document everything. Internal affairs investigators. Someone from the district attorney's office. The street was filling with official vehicles and personnel, all because one woman had said enough was enough. Tamika watched it all with a strange sense of detachment. Her arms still ached from holding that knife. Her heart was still racing. But she'd done it. She'd stopped Pierce from destroying her life. More than that, she'd potentially opened the door for dozens of other victims to get justice. Nicole Fletcher approached her, tears still on her cheeks. Thank you, she said simply. Thank you for being brave enough to fight back. Others from the crowd came forward with similar sentiments. Pastor Williams gripped her hand, unable to speak, but his eyes saying everything. People she didn't even know were thanking her, telling her she was a hero, saying she'd done what they'd all wished they could do. But Tamika didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a woman who'd been backed into a corner and fought her way out. She felt like someone who'd gotten lucky that Officer Chen had chosen truth over loyalty. She felt like a person who was about to face hours of questioning, probably legal challenges, possibly civil suits from Pierce's lawyers trying to flip the narrative. Ms. Washington, Captain Rodriguez said, approaching her again. Before we head to the station, I want you to understand something. What you did today was incredibly dangerous. In another situation with different officers responding, this could have ended very differently. I know, Tamika said quietly. But I also want you to know that I understand why you did it. The system failed you. Pierce was about to destroy your life, and you did what you felt you had to do to survive. That will be reflected in my report. Rodriguez handed her a card. This has my direct number on it. If you feel unsafe at any point, if anyone connected to this case tries to intimidate you or your family, you call me immediately. Do you understand? Tamika took the card. What about Andre? My nephew. Pierce was targeting him. We'll have officers check on him, make sure he's safe, and we'll make sure everyone knows that your family is under departmental protection. Anyone who touches them will answer to me personally. It was something, at least. Not complete safety, not complete justice, but more than Tamika had dared to hope for when she'd seen those lights in her rearview mirror today. Officer Chen approached hesitantly. Ms. Washington, I just want to say I'm sorry. I should have seen what Pierce was doing sooner. I should have stopped him before it got to this point. Tamika looked at the young officer. He couldn't have been more than a few years older than Andre. Probably joined the force with good intentions, wanting to help people, wanting to make a difference. And he'd ended up partnered with corruption incarnate. You saw it when it mattered, Tamika said finally. You told the truth when it counted. That's more than a lot of people do. Chen nodded, looking slightly relieved but still carrying obvious guilt. He'd have to live with knowing he'd worked alongside Pierce even if he hadn't known the full extent of the corruption. That would stay with him. The investigation that followed moved faster than anyone expected. When a detective confesses to 17 years of evidence planting, the system has no choice but to act. Pierce's cooperation was thorough and devastating. He gave them everything. Dates, names, case numbers, methods he'd used, every person he'd framed, every piece of evidence he'd manufactured, every life he'd destroyed. It took 3 weeks to compile the initial list. 42 people. 42 lives ruined by one corrupt officer and a system that hadn't looked closely enough. Tamika watched it unfold from her living room, the news coverage constant and overwhelming. Her face was everywhere. The woman who'd disarmed a corrupt detective, the hero who'd exposed police corruption, the veteran who'd fought back. Headlines and hashtags and endless analysis. But the real story was happening in quieter ways. Pastor Williams got a call on a Tuesday afternoon. His son, Darius, would be released from prison. The cocaine charge that had put him away was based entirely on Pierce's planted evidence. The conviction was being overturned, and the state was issuing an official apology. Darius would be home within 72 hours. When the pastor called Tamika to thank her, he cried so hard he couldn't speak for several minutes. His son had lost 5 years of his life, but at least he was getting a chance to reclaim what remained. At least he'd know his mother had been right to believe in him, even if she hadn't lived to see his vindication. Carlos Fletcher, Nicole's husband, got a formal apology letter from the Riverside Police Department. The harassment he'd endured was acknowledged as targeting and intimidation. It didn't undo the anxiety, the fear his children had developed around police, the way he'd changed his routes through town to avoid certain streets. But it was acknowledgement. It was truth on an official record. Officer David Chen became the youngest detective in Riverside's history 3 months after the incident. His willingness to tell the truth, to break ranks when it mattered, made him valuable in a department trying to rebuild trust. He was assigned to lead a new civilian oversight initiative, working directly with community members to review complaints and use of force incidents. Chen visited Tamika once, months after everything happened. They sat on her porch drinking sweet tea while Andre practiced basketball in the driveway, finally able to play outside without looking over his shoulder for Pierce's patrol car. I still think about it, Chen admitted. All the stops I was on with him, all the time something felt wrong, but I told myself I was just inexperienced. I missed so many signs. You were put in an impossible situation, Tamika said. The system trained you to trust other officers to follow their lead. Pierce used that against you like he used everything against everyone. But I should have known better. Probably, Tamika agreed. But you chose right when it counted. That's what matters. Chen watched Andre for a moment. How's he doing? Better. Still jumpy sometimes when he sees a police car. Still has nightmares, but he's working with a therapist. He's getting better. I'm sorry he had to go through that. Me too. But at least he's alive to go through it. That's more than some families can say. It was a sobering truth. Pierce's corruption had been bad, but the broader problems it exposed ran deeper. How many other officers were operating like Pierce in other cities? How many victims never got their day of vindication? Captain Rodriguez, who'd been promoted to deputy chief after her handling of the Pierce case, had implemented sweeping changes. Every officer now wore body cameras that couldn't be turned off. Every stop was reviewed randomly by civilian auditors. Every piece of evidence had to be logged through multiple checkpoints. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. The district attorney's office prosecuted Pierce aggressively. With his cooperation and the overwhelming evidence, the trial was quick. Pierce pleaded guilty to 42 counts of evidence tampering, civil rights violations, falsifying documents, and conspiracy. The judge gave him 23 years, though, with his cooperation, he might be eligible for parole after 15. The courtroom was packed the day of sentencing. Many of Pierce's victims were there, including Darius Williams, who'd been out of prison for 4 months by then. They didn't cheer when the sentence was read. They just sat quietly, watching the man who'd terrorized them get led away in chains. Justice wasn't always satisfying, but it was necessary. 5 other officers ended up facing discipline or dismissal for covering up Pierce's activities or failing to report suspicious behavior. None faced criminal charges, which angered many in the community. But it was something. It was acknowledgement that the problem went beyond one bad officer. Tamika became an unexpected voice in police reform conversations. She didn't want the attention, but she understood the platform she'd been given. She spoke at town halls, at community meetings, at police training sessions. She told her story not to glorify what she'd done, but to illustrate why it should never have been necessary. I'm not a hero, she said at one such meeting, speaking to a room full of officers and community members. I'm a woman who was forced into an impossible situation. I shouldn't have had to defend myself with a knife. The system should have worked when I filed those first complaints, when I called internal affairs, when I reached out for help through proper channels. But it didn't. And I was lucky. I had military training. I had the presence of mind to record everything. I had Officer Chen choose truth. Not everyone has those things. She paused, looking around the room. Real reform means people like me never have to make the choice I made. Real reform means the system protects victims instead of making them fight for basic justice. Real reform means good officers don't have to risk their careers to tell the truth. The reforms that came out of the Pierce case went beyond Riverside. The state legislature passed new laws requiring independent oversight of police misconduct investigations. They mandated annual audits of evidence handling procedures. They created a database to track officers who'd been fired for misconduct, preventing them from just moving to another department. Andre graduated high school 2 years after the incident. At his graduation, he wore a small pin with the date August 15th on it, the day his aunt had fought back, the day things changed. Not because he was celebrating violence, but because he was honoring the moment when someone had finally said enough. He'd been accepted to 3 colleges and chose to study criminal justice. When Tamika asked him why, he said simply, "Because the system needs people who understand what it's like on the other side. People who know what Pierce did wasn't just bad policing. It was torture. It was terrorism. And it happened because no one with power cared enough to look closely."